I thought my mother was a saint until a DNA test revealed the twisted web of lies she'd been weaving for 32 years. What I discovered didn't just change everything I knew about my family. It made me question if the woman who raised me was capable of love at all. Growing up, I was the poster child for having the perfect mom. When my friends complained about their mothers being too strict, too absent, or too embarrassing, I genuinely felt like I'd won the parental lottery. My mom, Linda, was the type of woman who remembered every detail about everyone's life, who showed up to every school event with homemade cookies, and who somehow managed to make our modest duplex feel like the coziest place on earth. I'm 32 now, but I can still picture her perfectly from my childhood. Always dressed nicely, even for grocery runs, her auburn hair styled in soft waves, and this way of making everyone feel special when they walked into our home. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office, but she approached that job like she was running a hospitality empire. Patients would specifically request appointments when she was working because she remembered their kids' names, their hobbies, their fears about dental work. My dad left when I was 3. I don't have many memories of him, just fragments really. The smell of cigarettes and coffee, a laugh that was too loud for our small living room, and the sound of the front door closing one. Tuesday morning that somehow felt different from all the other times. Mom never spoke badly about him. When I'd ask questions as a kid, she'd get this distant look and say things like, "That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you." When I was a teenager, I used to beg her to put herself out there, to try online dating or let Mrs. Peterson from next door set her up with her brother. She'd just smile and ruffle my hair, saying, "I've got everything I need right here. You're my whole world, kiddo." And I believed her. More than that, I felt the weight of being someone's whole world, and I wore it like a badge of honor. I was a good kid. Honor roll, no parties, home by curfew. I volunteered at the animal shelter because she said compassion was the most important quality a person could have. I chose a college just 40 minutes away because the thought of leaving her alone felt cruel. Not just quick check-ins, but real conversations. She wanted to know about my job at the marketing firm, my coworkers, my dates, my dreams. When I started dating Marcus in my late 20s, she was the first person I called after our first kiss. When he proposed 2 years later, she cried harder than I did. "My baby girl is getting married. Your father would be so proud." It was one of the rare times she mentioned him without prompting, and something about the way she said it stuck with me. Not would have been proud like he was dead, but would be proud like he was just somewhere else, living a different life, where he might care about his daughter's engagement. The wedding planning brought us even closer. Mom threw herself into every detail with the enthusiasm of someone making up for lost time. She helped me try on hundreds of dresses, researched florists, and somehow managed to negotiate with vendors in a way that saved us thousands of dollars. She kept a wedding binder that was more organized than most business proposals I'd seen at work. "This is what I dreamed about when you were little," she told me one afternoon as we sampled cakes. "I used to imagine dancing with you at your wedding, seeing you in your dress, watching you marry someone who deserves you." The wedding itself was magical, small but perfect, held in the garden of a historic in about an hour from where I grew up. Mom looked radiant in her navy blue dress, and when she walked me down the aisle, my choice since Dad wasn't there to do it, I felt like the luckiest person alive to have her as my mother. Marcus's aunt, a woman I'd met only once before, approached me near the end of the night. She'd had a few drinks, and she was that particular kind of tipsy where people say things they probably shouldn't. "You know," she said, swaying slightly as she looked between me and my mom, "it's funny, where Mom had auburn hair. I had dark brown, almost black." We chalked it up to me taking after my father's side, though I'd never seen any pictures of his family to confirm that theory. "Good thing I got her personality instead of her looks," I joked. But Marcus's aunt kept staring with this puzzled expression. "It's just that my sister looked exactly like my mother, you know, and my daughter is practically my clone. Genetics are usually pretty obvious, but you two could be strangers." Not because I cared about looking like my mom, but because of the way the aunt said it, like she was solving a puzzle, like there was something that didn't add up. Over the next few months, as Marcus and I settled into married life, I found myself noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. Little inconsistencies in the stories Mom told about my early years. The fact that we had no baby photos of me until I was about 6 months old, which she explained by saying she'd have been too overwhelmed as a new single mother to think about documenting everything. I started wondering about my medical history too. I'd always been healthy, but as I got older and Marcus and I started talking about having kids, I realized I knew almost nothing about hereditary conditions on either side of my family. When I asked Mom about it, she got vague and said my father's family had a history of heart problems, but she couldn't remember specifics. "Why don't we just order one of those ancestry kits?" Marcus suggested one evening after. I'd spent an hour on the phone with Mom trying to pin down details about my grandparents' health issues. "You could learn about your genetic background and maybe even connect with some relatives on your father's side." The idea excited me. I'd always been curious about that half of my heritage, the family I'd never known. Maybe I'd discover I had cousins or aunts who could fill in some of the blanks about my father's side of the family tree. When I mentioned the idea to Mom during our next phone call, her reaction was swift and sharp. "Why would you want to do that?" she asked, and I could hear tension in her voice that wasn't usually there. "Those tests aren't even accurate, honey. And besides, family isn't about DNA." "I know that, Mom. I just think it would be interesting to learn more about where I come from. Maybe I have relatives out there." "Who? You have all the family you need?" she interrupted, which was unlike her. Mom never cut me off mid-sentence. "I don't understand this obsession with the past. Your father left us, remember? His family never reached out, never cared. Why go looking for people who didn't want to find you?" Her reaction seemed disproportionate, but I didn't push it. If she was uncomfortable with the idea, I could respect that. After all, she was the one who'd been hurt by my father's abandonment. Maybe the thought of me connecting with his family felt like a betrayal, but the seed was planted. Marcus, bless him, didn't bring it up again directly, but I caught him looking at ancestry websites when he thought I wasn't paying attention. And slowly, quietly, my curiosity began to outweigh my desire to protect my mother's feelings. The turning point came during a family medical questionnaire at my yearly physical. The nurse was going through standard questions about family history, and I found myself saying, "I don't know," to almost everything. "Heart disease in immediate family?" The nurse looked up from her clipboard with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "Honey, this information could be really important for your health, especially if you're planning to have children someday. Is there any way you could find out more about your family medical history?" Driving home from the appointment, I made a decision. I was 31 years old, married, and thinking about starting a family of my own. I had a right to know about my genetic background, didn't I? This wasn't about hurting my mother or dishonoring the family she'd created for us. This was about being responsible for my own health and future. That weekend, while Marcus was at a work conference, I ordered the Ancestry kit online. It felt both thrilling and slightly rebellious, like I was a teenager sneaking out past curfew. The kit arrived 3 days later in a discreet white box. I tucked it away in my desk drawer, planning to take the test when I felt ready. But ready for what? I thought I was just looking for medical information and maybe some distant cousins. I had no idea I was about to uncover a secret that would fundamentally alter my understanding of my entire life. The Ancestry kit sat in my drawer for 2 weeks before I worked up the courage to use it. Every time I walked past my desk, I could feel it there, like it was radiating this weird energy. Marcus knew I'd ordered it. I'm terrible at keeping secrets from him. But he didn't pressure me about when I'd actually spit in the tube and send it off. He just squeezed my hand one morning over coffee and said, "Whatever you find out, we'll deal with it together." I finally did the test on a quiet Sunday morning in October. Mom was visiting her college friend in Tampa for the weekend, which felt like a sign. I followed the instructions, sealed up the sample, and walked it directly to the mailbox, before I could change my mind. The whole process took maybe 10 minutes, but it felt monumental, like I was crossing some invisible line. The waiting period was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks, but I found myself checking my email obsessively after just 2 weeks. Every notification made my heart race. Marcus started teasing me about it, calling me DNA detective, and pretending to hide his phone when Ancestry ads came on TV. "You know it's not going to come back faster just because you're refreshing your email every 5 minutes. He said one evening, watching me check my phone for the 100th time that day, I know, I'm just excited. What if I have like 50 cousins out there? What if my dad's family has been looking for me this whole time? Marcus smiled, but I caught something else in his expression. A flicker of concern maybe, or caution. What if they haven't been looking for you? Are you prepared for that possibility too? I thought I was. I thought the worst-case scenario was discovering that my father's side of the family really didn't want anything to do with me, just like Mom had always said. Or maybe learning about some hereditary health condition I'd need to monitor. Those seemed like manageable disappointments. While I waited, I threw myself into other family history research. I created accounts on genealogy websites, searched through public records, and even reached out to a few people on social media who shared my father's last name. Most didn't respond, but one woman, a Jennifer who lived in Oregon, wrote back saying she'd never heard of a Robert Mitchell from our area, but wished me luck in my search. The more I dug, the more frustrated I became. It was like my father had been completely erased from the public record after 1993. No social media presence, no address changes, no marriage records, nothing. Either he'd changed his name, moved somewhere with very different record-keeping practices, or I didn't want to think about the OR. About 5 weeks after I'd sent off my sample, something strange happened during one of my regular phone calls with Mom. I'd been telling her about a project at work, nothing remotely related to DNA or family history, when she suddenly interrupted me. You know, sweetheart, I've been thinking about what you said a few months ago about those ancestry tests. My stomach flipped. I hadn't mentioned the test to her since our initial conversation, and I definitely hadn't told her I'd actually ordered one. Oh yeah. I tried to keep my voice casual. I just want you to understand that some things are better left alone. The past is the past for a reason. Your father left us, and digging around in that isn't going to bring him back or give you the closure you're looking for. Mom, I'm not trying to control you, honey. I just love you so much, and I don't want to see you get hurt by people who don't deserve to know the amazing woman you've become. There was something in her voice I'd never heard before. Not quite pleading, but close to it. Underneath that, something else. Something that sounded almost like panic. Mom, are you okay? You sound stressed. I'm fine, baby. Just a mother's intuition, I guess. Promise me you'll be careful about opening doors that maybe should stay closed. After we hung up, I sat in my car. I'd taken the call during my lunch break, feeling completely unsettled. How did she know I was still thinking about the ancestry test? Had I said something that tipped her off? Or was this just coincidental maternal worry? That evening, I told Marcus about the conversation, and he got that same cautious look he'd had weeks earlier. That's kind of weird timing, he said carefully. I mean, you haven't talked about this stuff with her in months, right? Right. And she brought it up completely out of nowhere. Like she'd been thinking about it, like someone had been asking her about it. We stared at each other as the implications sank in. Had someone contacted her? Had my poking around on genealogy websites somehow gotten back to her? It seemed unlikely, but not impossible. 2 days later, my results came in. I was at work when the email notification popped up on my phone. Your ancestry results are ready. My hands were literally shaking as I tried to log into the website. The office suddenly felt too hot, too bright, too crowded. I grabbed my laptop and headed for the empty conference room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The ethnicity breakdown was the first thing I saw. 52% Irish, 23% German, 15% Scandinavian, 8% Eastern European, 2% trace regions. Nothing earth-shattering there, though it was interesting to see the percentages. Mom had always said we were mostly Irish on her side, so that tracked. But then I clicked on the DNA matches tab, and my world tilted sideways. The closest match wasn't a distant cousin or great-aunt. It was listed as close family, first cousin, with a confidence level of extremely high. The profile name was Michael Chen, and we shared 1,847 centimorgans of DNA. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Chen wasn't a name I recognized from either side of my family, and the profile picture showed an Asian man who looked to be in his 40s or 50s. There was absolutely no way this person was my first cousin through either my mom's Irish family or my father's side, which Mom had always described as typical Midwestern mutts. I clicked on his profile with trembling fingers. Limited information, but it showed he was born in 1971, making him about 10 years older than me. His family tree was partially filled out, showing parents named David Chen and Patricia Morrison Chen. The name, Morrison, made my breath catch. That was Mom's maiden name. With a growing sense of unreality, I scrolled through more of my DNA matches. The second closest was listed as close family too. Someone named Jennifer Morrison, with 1,205 centimorgans shared. Her profile picture showed a woman with auburn hair and hazel eyes who looked startlingly familiar. She looked like my mother. Actually, she looked like my mother might look with 20 fewer years and 50 fewer pounds. Same nose, same smile, same way of tilting her head slightly in photos. I spent the next 3 hours in that conference room, taking screenshots, making notes, trying to piece together what I was looking at. The more I dug, the clearer it became that I wasn't matched with random strangers. I was matched with what appeared to be a whole branch of Morrison family members I'd never heard of. Jennifer Morrison's tree showed she was the daughter of Robert Morrison and Helen Morrison Walsh. She had a brother listed, Michael Morrison, born in 1971. But wait, Michael Morrison and Michael Chen were the same person, according to the DNA match. He'd taken his wife's name, apparently, which explained the different surname. I felt like I was reading a mystery novel where I was somehow both the detective and the victim. These people were definitely related to me, but they were definitely not part of the family story I'd grown up with. Around 4 o'clock, I finally worked up the courage to send Michael Chen a message through the Ancestry website. Hi, Michael. I'm showing up as your closest DNA match, and I'm trying to figure out how we're related. I was born in 1991, and my mother's maiden name was Morrison. My father was supposedly Robert Mitchell, but I don't have much information about his family. Would you be willing to share any information that might help me understand our connection? Thank you so much, Emma. I hit send before I could lose my nerve, then immediately wanted to take it back. What if I was opening a can of worms that would destroy everything? What if there were family secrets or feuds I didn't know about? What if my phone rang? Marcus, hey, how'd the results turn out? Find any long-lost relatives? I started crying. Not gentle tears, but big, ugly sobs that came out of nowhere and left me gasping for breath. Emma, what's wrong? What happened? I think I managed between sobs. I think my mom lied to me about everything. Marcus left work immediately and found me still locked in the conference room, surrounded by printouts of DNA match information and family trees I'd hastily sketched on napkins. I looked like a conspiracy theorist's vision board had exploded around me. Okay, he said, settling into the chair across from me and speaking in the same calm tone he used during his most stressful work presentations. Walk me through what you found. I spread out the screenshots like evidence in a crime scene. Look at these DNA matches. It's Michael Chen. Person shares enough DNA with me to be my first cousin, but look at his family tree. His parents are Robert Morrison and Helen Morrison.
Ow.
Morrison was my mom's maiden name. Marcus studied the papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. So Michael would be your mom's nephew? That's what it looks like. But Marcus, I've never heard of any of these people. Mom always told me her parents died when she was young and she was an only child. It's no siblings, no aunts or uncles, no cousins, she said. That's why it was always just the two of us. Maybe she lost touch with extended family, or had a falling out with them. I shook my head. Look at this Jennifer Morrison match. Shares even more DNA with me. Enough to be either an aunt or a half-sister. Marcus, she looks exactly like my mom. Exactly. Same features, same hair color, everything. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the photos I'd printed out. Right. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Emma, what exactly are you thinking here? The words felt dangerous to say out loud. I think my mom isn't who she said she was. I think maybe her real name is Morrison, and she has family she never told me about. But I don't understand why she would lie about being an only child, or why none of these relatives ever tried to contact us. Did you message any of them, just Michael? I sent him a message about an hour ago asking how we might be related. As if on cue, my phone chimed with an email notification. New message from Michael Chen. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. Marcus had to help me open the Ancestry app. Emma, I'm so glad you reached out. Been wondering about you for years. Jennifer's my sister and she's been looking for you too. This is going to sound crazy, but we think you might be our cousin Patricia's daughter. Patricia Morrison, our dad's younger sister. She disappeared about 33 years ago after some family drama, and we've been trying to find her ever since. Are you free to talk on the phone tonight? I'd love to explain more about our family and see if we can piece this together. My number is 555-VO147. Michael. I read the message 3 times before the words sank in. Patricia Morrison. Not Linda Morrison, which was my mom's name, but Patricia. Close enough to be a nickname, maybe. Holy shit, Marcus breathed, reading over my shoulder. Emma, your mom's name is Linda, right? Right. Linda Patricia Morrison, actually. She always went by her first name, but her middle name is Patricia. We stared at each other as the implications hit. My mother hadn't just hidden family members from me. She'd been living under what was essentially a false identity, using her middle name instead of her first name, cutting off all contact with her family, and creating an elaborate story about being an orphan. But why? I called Michael that evening from our kitchen, with Marcus sitting beside me for moral support and a legal pad ready to take notes. My hands were still shaking as I dialed. Emma. Michael's voice was warm and slightly nervous. I can't believe we're finally talking. Jennifer's here with me too, if that's okay. She's been so excited since I told her you reached out. Hi, Emma. A woman's voice in the background, bright and welcoming. This is so crazy. I've been wondering about you for so long. For the next hour, they told me a story that was completely different from everything I'd grown up believing. According to Michael and Jennifer, my mother wasn't an orphan at all. She was the youngest of 3 children, born Patricia Lynn Morrison in 1969. Their father, Robert Morrison, was her older brother. Their grandmother, Helen Morrison, had only died 5 years ago at the age of 87. Wait, I interrupted. 5 years ago? But Mom told me her parents died when she was a teenager. No, Grandma Helen lived until 2018, Jennifer said gently. She used to talk about Patricia all the time, wondering what happened to her, whether she was okay. We have boxes of letters she wrote but never sent because she didn't know how to find Patricia after she left. Left? Left from where? Michael sighed. That's where the story gets complicated. Patricia got pregnant when she was about 19, 20 maybe. This would have been 1990, 1991. The family wasn't thrilled about it. Different times, you know. Our dad and grandparents were pretty traditional, and Patricia wasn't married. But they weren't trying to kick her out or anything, Jennifer added quickly. They wanted her to stay, wanted to help raise the baby. But Patricia got it in her head that everyone was disappointed in her, that she was bringing shame to the family. And then one day she was just gone, Michael continued. Left a note saying she was starting over somewhere new, that the baby deserved a fresh start without the family drama. She promised to contact everyone once she got settled, but we never heard from her again. I felt like I was hearing about a stranger's life, not my own mother's. She never tried to reach out, not once in 33 years. We tried to find her, Jennifer said, and I could hear the sadness in her voice. Hired a private investigator in the late 90s, searched social media when that became a thing, even appeared on one of those reunion TV shows once. But it's hard to find someone who doesn't want to be found, especially if they change their name. Change her name? Well, she was Patricia Morrison when she left. If she started going by Linda, and if she took your father's name when you were born, there wouldn't be much of a paper trail connecting her back to us. But that raised another question that made my stomach lurch. What do you know about my father, Robert Mitchell? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Like Emma, Michael said carefully. We don't know anything about a Robert Mitchell. Patricia never told us who the father was. We always assumed she'd tell us eventually, but then she left before we could find out. The room started spinning a little. But my mom always talked about my dad. She had stories about him, about their relationship, about why he left when I was 3. Another pause. Longer this time, Emma Jennifer said very gently. If Patricia left when she was pregnant and she never contacted us after that, then we have no way of knowing what happened with the baby's father. But honey, if she was making up stories about her own family, is it possible she was making up stories about him too? After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the notes Marcus had taken during the call. Page after page of information about aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents I'd never heard of. A whole family that had been looking for us for 3 decades while Mom told me we were alone in the world? "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked finally. "I'm thinking my entire life has been a lie," I said. "And I'm thinking I need to find out how much of a lie it's been." That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to order a paternity test. Not just any paternity test, but one of those advanced DNA tests that could potentially identify biological fathers even without having their DNA on file. If I could build a family tree on my father's side using genetic genealogy, maybe I could figure out who he really was and whether the stories about Robert Mitchell had any basis in reality. "Are you sure you want to go down that road?" Marcus asked. "I mean, you just found out your mom has been lying about her entire family? Do you really want to discover that she's been lying about your dad too?" I thought about it for a long moment. Did I want to know? Part of me was tempted to leave it alone, to just reach out to my newfound Morrison relatives and let sleeping dogs lie about my father's identity. I'd spent 32 years without knowing the truth about either side of my family. I could probably spend the next 32 years the same way. But then I thought about that medical questionnaire at my doctor's office, about the family history information I still didn't have. I thought about the children Marcus and I wanted to have someday, and the genetic information they deserve to know about. I thought about my mom, who had apparently spent my entire life crafting elaborate stories instead of telling me the truth about where I came from. "Yeah," I said finally, "I need to know. All of it." The next morning, I ordered the most comprehensive genetic genealogy test I could find online. This one promised to go deeper than the ancestry test, looking at Y chromosome markers and mitochondrial DNA, and connecting me with a genetic genealogy specialist who could help build family trees using DNA evidence. I also did something else. I created a fake Facebook profile, something I never thought I'd do, and started searching for people named Robert Mitchell in the geographic area where Mom claimed we'd lived when I was born. I found dozens of them, but none who seemed to match the timeline or the sparse details Mom had given me over the years. More troubling, I couldn't find any record of my parents ever being married. No marriage certificate, no divorce papers, no nothing. According to every public record I could access, Linda Patricia Morrison and Robert Mitchell had never had any kind of legal relationship, which meant either Mom had been using a different name when she was with my father, or Robert Mitchell didn't exist at all. I was starting to suspect the latter. The genetic genealogy test kit arrived 3 days later, and this time I didn't hesitate. I did the test immediately and paid extra for expedited processing. While I waited for those results, I spent hours every evening researching DNA analysis and genetic genealogy techniques. I watched YouTube videos about identifying biological parents through DNA matches. I read forums where people shared success stories about finding family members through genetic detective work. And slowly, I started to prepare myself for the possibility that everything my mother had told me about my father was. The genetic genealogy specialist's name was Dr. Rebecca Torres, and she had a voice that was both professional and kind, the kind of voice you'd want delivering life-changing news. When she called on a Tuesday afternoon in November, I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store, putting off the mundane task of buying dinner ingredients, because I was too distracted to focus on normal life. "Emma, I have your results," she said without preamble. "Are you somewhere private where we can talk?" My heart started racing. "Yes, I'm alone. What did you find?" Well, let me start by saying that genetic genealogy can be incredibly powerful for uncovering family connections. But it can also reveal information that's emotionally challenging. Before I share what I've discovered, I want to make sure you're prepared for any outcome. "I think I am," I said, though my voice sounded shaky even to me. I mean, I already found out my mom has been lying about her entire family for my whole life, so I'm kind of expecting more bad news. Dr. Torres was quiet for a moment. "Emma, based on your DNA profile and the extensive matching we've done through multiple databases, I can say with near certainty that Robert Mitchell is not your biological father. Even though I'd been suspecting this for weeks, Hearing it confirmed felt like being punched in the stomach. Okay, I managed. Do you know who my biological father is? That's where this gets complicated, and I need to prepare you for what I'm about to tell you. Using your DNA matches and building out family trees on your paternal side, I've been able to identify your biological father with a high degree of confidence. She paused, and in that silence, I knew I was about to hear something terrible. Emma, your biological father is Robert Morrison, your mother's older brother. It's the same Robert Morrison who is Michael and Jennifer's father. For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. The words didn't make sense, like she was speaking a foreign language.
Sorry, what?
Your mother, Patricia Morrison, and Robert Morrison share enough DNA with you to be your biological parents. They're siblings, Emma. Your DNA shows that your parents were brother and sister. The phone slipped out of my hand and clattered onto the floor of the car. I could hear Dr. Torres' voice, tiny and distant, calling my name, but I couldn't respond. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mother and my father were siblings. My father wasn't some mysterious man named Robert Mitchell who'd abandoned us when I was 3. My father was Robert Morrison, my mother's brother. According to Michael and Jennifer, was a married man with 2 children who had no idea his sister had ever been pregnant. I was the product of incest. I don't know how long I sat in that parking lot, staring at nothing, trying to wrap my mind around what I'd just learned. Eventually, I picked up the phone and heard Dr. Torres still talking, her voice gentle but persistent. Emma, are you there? I know this is shocking, but I need to make sure you're okay. I think I'm going to be sick, I whispered. That's a normal response. This is traumatic information. Do you have someone who can be with you right now? A partner? A friend? Marcus. I needed Marcus. But first I needed to understand what I was dealing with. Dr. Torres, are you absolutely certain about this? Is there any chance you made a mistake? I triple-checked everything, Emma. I had a colleague independently verify the results. Your DNA is consistent with being the offspring of 2 people who share approximately 50% of their genetic material, which is what we see in parent-child relationships, but also in full sibling relationships. Combined with the family tree information you provided about your mother being a Morrison, and the DNA matches showing Robert Morrison as your closest paternal relative, there's no other explanation that fits the data. Does this mean I'm going to have health problems? Genetic issues from this? Not necessarily. While there are increased risks associated with consanguinity, many children born from such relationships are perfectly healthy. You're 32 years old and have been healthy so far, which is a good sign. But this is definitely something you'll want to discuss with a genetic counselor and your physician. After I hung up, I called Marcus and asked him to come find me. I couldn't drive, couldn't trust myself to get home safely. While I waited for him, I sat in the parking lot and tried to process the magnitude of what my mother had done. She hadn't just lied about having family. She hadn't just created a fictional father to explain my existence. She'd committed incest with her own brother and then spent 32 years weaving an elaborate web of lies to cover it up. When Marcus found me, I was still sitting in the car with the engine off, staring at my hands like they belonged to someone else. Emma, baby, what happened? I looked up at him. This good, honest man I'd married, who'd never lied to me about anything more significant than whether he'd remembered to take out the trash. And I didn't know how to tell him that his wife was the product of one of society's deepest taboos. My father is my uncle, I said finally. Marcus went very still. I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then a kind of horrified understanding as I explained what Dr. Torres had told me. To his credit, he didn't flinch, didn't pull away, didn't look at me like I was suddenly different or damaged. He just listened, and when I was finished, he pulled me into his arms and held me while I cried. We're going home, he said quietly. And then we're going to figure out what to do next. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times Mom had told me stories about my father, how they'd met at a coffee shop, how he'd made her laugh on their first date, how he'd held me when I was a baby before he decided he wasn't ready for the responsibility. Every single story had been a lie, crafted to hide the fact that my father was her own brother. I thought about family gatherings that had never happened because we supposedly had no family. I thought about all the times I'd wished I had grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, not knowing that I did have them, and they'd been looking for me my entire life. But mostly I thought about the betrayal, not just the lying, though. That was bad enough. The betrayal of raising me to trust her completely, to see her as the perfect mother, while she knew the entire foundation of our relationship was built on the most devastating lie imaginable. Around 3 in the morning, I made a decision. I was going to confront her, not over the phone, not through careful diplomatic conversations. I was going to drive to her house and demand the truth about everything. Marcus tried to convince me to wait to process the information for a few days before doing anything irreversible, but I couldn't wait. Every minute that passed felt like another minute of living in the lie she'd created for me. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove the 40 minutes to Mom's house. I sat in her driveway for 10 minutes trying to work up the courage to walk to her front door. How do you confront someone about incest? How do you ask your mother to explain why she slept with her brother and then lied about it for 3 decades? She opened the door, her face lit up with the same genuine joy it always did when she saw me unexpectedly. "Emma, what a wonderful surprise. I was just thinking about calling you. Come in. I'll make coffee." She looked so normal, so much like the mother I'd always known, that for a moment, I almost convinced myself Dr. Torres had made a mistake. This woman couldn't be capable of what I was about to accuse her of. But then I remembered the DNA results, and the family she'd hidden from me, and the fictional stories about Robert Mitchell, and my resolve hardened. "Mom, we need to talk." Something in my tone must have warned her, because her smile faltered. "Of course, honey. Is everything okay?" "You look upset." I followed her into the kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd made me countless meals, helped me with homework, listened to me complain about teenage drama. The normalcy of it made what I was about to do feel surreal. "I took a DNA test," I said without preamble. Her face went white. Not pale, not worried. White like every drop of blood had drained out of her face in an instant. "Emma?" "I know about the Morrison family, Mom. I know about your brother Robert, and your sister Jennifer, and your mother Helen, who died 5 years ago. I know you're not an orphan, and I know you've been lying to me about our family my entire life." She sat down heavily in one of her kitchen chairs, her hands trembling. "How did you— The DNA test matched me with Michael and Jennifer. They've been looking for you for 33 years, Mom. They never stopped hoping they'd find you." Mom, Patricia, I guess her name was Patricia, put her face in her hands. "I can explain." Can you explain why you told me we had no family while your mother spent decades writing letters she never sent because she didn't know how to find us? Can you explain why you made me think I was alone in the world when I had grandparents and aunts and uncles who wanted to know me? She was crying now, but I didn't feel the usual urge to comfort her. Felt cold, detached, like I was watching someone else's confrontation. "I was protecting you," she whispered. "From what?" "From having a family who loved me." She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. It's not just sadness or regret, but shame so deep it was like looking into an abyss. "Emma, there are things you don't understand. Then explain them." Starting with my father. The words hung in the air between us like a weapon. She knew that I knew. I could see it in the way her shoulders slumped, in the way she seemed to age 10 years in the span of a few seconds. "Robert Mitchell doesn't exist, does he, Mom?" She shook her head, still not looking at me. "My father is your brother Robert." It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it like one. She just nodded, so slightly I almost missed it. "How?" The word came out harsh. The aftermath was worse than the revelation itself. At least the DNA results had been swift, brutal, and final. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion disaster that seemed to contaminate every aspect of my life. Marcus tried to be supportive, but I could see the strain in his eyes, not judgment about my origins. He was too good a person for that. But worry about what this discovery was doing to me. I wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating regularly, and I'd become obsessed with researching the psychological effects of incest and the health implications for children born from consanguineous relationships. "You need to talk to someone," he said one evening, finding me hunched over my laptop at 2 in the morning, reading medical journals about genetic disorders. "A therapist, a counselor, someone who specializes in family trauma." "I'm fine," I lied, closing the laptop. "I'm just trying to understand what this means for my health, for our future kids." "Emma, you haven't been fine since you found out. That's okay. No one would be fine after learning what you learned. But you're destroying yourself trying to process this alone." He was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. How do you explain to a stranger that your entire identity is built on lies? How do you say the words "my parents" or "siblings" out loud to someone whose job it is to help people cope with normal problems? A worse part was dealing with my mother's attempts to reconcile. She called every day, sometimes multiple times a day. When I stopped answering her calls, she started texting. When I blocked her number, she showed up at my apartment. "Emma, please, just 5 minutes," she begged through the door when I refused to let her in. "I know you're angry, but we're family. We can get through this." Family. The word felt like a joke now. The kind of family was built on incest and decades of lies. "Go away, Mom," I called back. "I need time." "How much time, Emma? I can't lose you. You're all I have." And there it was, the manipulation I'd never noticed before. Making me responsible for her emotional well-being, making me feel guilty for needing space after she'd destroyed my understanding of everything I thought I knew about myself. Meanwhile, I was building a relationship with my newly discovered relatives. Michael and Jennifer were patient and kind, understanding that I needed time to process not just their existence, but the circumstances that had kept us apart. They shared photos from family gatherings I'd never attended, told me stories about the grandmother I'd never known, and gradually painted a picture of the family life I'd been denied. "She was so stubborn," Jennifer said during one of our phone calls, talking about my mother. "Even when we were kids, Patricia had to do everything her own way. If you told her not to touch something, that was guaranteed to be the first thing she'd grab. But she wasn't a bad person," Michael added quickly. "Impulsive, maybe. Secretive. But she wasn't cruel or selfish, at least not when we were growing up." I wanted to ask them about their father. My father. But I couldn't bring myself to form the words. How do you ask your cousins what their dad is like when their dad is also your biological father? How do you explain that you want to know about his personality, his interests, his health history, without revealing the devastating truth about why he's relevant to you? Dr. Torres had advised me to be careful about how much I shared with the Morrison family. "This information could be very damaging to a lot of people," she'd said. "Robert Morrison may have no idea what happened with his sister. And finding out now could destroy his marriage, his relationship with his children, his entire life. You need to think carefully about whether revealing this serves any purpose beyond satisfying your own need for truth." But keeping the secret felt like continuing my mother's pattern of lies. And I was exhausted from carrying information that felt too big for one person to hold. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Mom, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrible. I was going to tell Michael and Jennifer the truth about my parentage. Not to hurt anyone, but because I was tired of being the keeper of family secrets, and because I felt like they deserved to know why their sister had really disappeared all those years ago. I asked them to meet me for coffee, somewhere neutral and private. We chose a small cafe about halfway between my city and theirs, a place where we could talk without being interrupted or overheard. Jennifer arrived first, looking nervous, but hopeful. "I brought some more family photos," she said, pulling out a manila envelope, including some of Patricia from high school. "Gow, I thought you might want to see what she looked like at your age." Michael arrived a few minutes later, and we settled into a corner booth with our drinks. They were both trying so hard to be welcoming, to help me feel connected to the family I'd never known, that what I was about to tell them felt like a betrayal of their kindness. "There's something else I need to tell you about why Patricia left," I said, my hands wrapped around my coffee mug for warmth and comfort. "Something that the DNA test revealed that I haven't shared with you yet." They both leaned forward, expectant, probably thinking I was about to tell them about some long-lost boyfriend or family feud that had driven Mom away. "My biological father isn't some mystery man Patricia never told you about," I said, forcing myself to look them in the eyes. "My biological father is your father, Robert Morrison." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the espresso machine hissing in the background, conversations from other tables, the traffic outside. Michael and Jennifer stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What?" Jennifer whispered finally. "The DNA test shows that my parents share enough genetic material to be siblings. Combined with what you've told me about your family tree, the only explanation is that Patricia and Robert are my biological parents." Michael's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a kind of sick understanding. "Are you saying that Patricia and our dad?" "Yes." Jennifer put her hand over her mouth like she was going to be sick. Oh my God, Emma, that's why she left." That's why she never came back. It also explains why she lied about having family, Michael said, his voice hollow. She couldn't risk anyone finding out about you and putting together the truth. We sat in stunned silence for several minutes. I watched them process the information, saw the moment when they realized that I wasn't just their cousin, I was also their half-sister. That the family reunion they'd been hoping for was actually much more complicated than they'd imagined. Does Dad know? Jennifer asked finally. Mom says no. She says she left without telling him she was pregnant because she didn't want to destroy his life. Jesus, Michael breathed. This is going to kill him. He's been carrying guilt about Patricia disappearing for 33 years, thinking he somehow failed as a big brother. If he finds out that he's the reason she left, and that he has a daughter he never knew about, ... We don't have to tell him, Jennifer said quickly. I mean, what good would it do now? You said your mom, Patricia? Thought she was protecting everyone by keeping this secret. Maybe she was right, but Michael was shaking his head. We can't not tell him. He has a daughter. He has a right to know, and Emma has a right to know her father. Does she, though? Jennifer turned to me. Emma, do you want a relationship with him? Knowing what you know about how you were conceived? The question hit me like a physical blow. Did I want a relationship with my father-uncle? Did I want to look into the eyes of the man who'd slept with his own sister and created me? Did I want to call him dad or uncle or some impossible combination of both? I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what I want anymore. I don't know what's right or wrong or fair to anyone involved. We talked for another hour, going in circles, trying to figure out what to do with the information that could devastate multiple families. In the end, we decided to wait. To give me time to process everything, to figure out what kind of relationship I wanted with the Morrison family, before we made any decisions about telling Robert the truth. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially in small communities where everyone knows everyone else's business. 3 days after our coffee meeting, Jennifer called me in tears. Emma, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen, but I think Dad knows something's wrong. He keeps asking why we're acting strange, why we're whispering when he walks into a room. And this morning he saw me looking at the photos I brought to show you, and he asked where I got the picture of Patricia. My blood ran cold. What did you tell him? I said I found it in some old family albums, but Emma, he's not stupid. He knows we've been in contact with someone about Patricia. He's been asking questions all day about who we've been talking to and whether we've found her. That evening my phone rang. Unknown number with an area code I didn't recognize, but somehow I knew who it was before I answered. The voice was deep, tentative, and familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. This is Robert Morrison. I think you're my daughter. That phone call lasted 3 hours and changed nothing and everything all at once. Robert Morrison's voice carried the weight of 33 years of guilt, confusion, and desperate hope. He'd figured out from Michael and Jennifer's behavior that they'd found Patricia, and when they finally admitted they'd been in contact with her daughter, he'd put together enough pieces to understand that he was my biological father. But he didn't know the whole truth. He thought I was the result of some affair Patricia had kept secret, some relationship she'd had around the time she disappeared. The possibility that he was my father in the most literal, devastating sense hadn't occurred to him yet. I remember that time period, he said, his voice heavy with regret. Your mom, Patricia, she was going through a really hard time. She'd dropped out of college, was working dead-end jobs, felt like the family was disappointed in her. I was getting divorced, barely keeping my head above water with my own problems. We leaned on each other, maybe more than we should have. The way he said it made my stomach churn. He was dancing around the truth without realizing how close he was getting to it. I always wondered if there was someone she didn't tell us about, he continued. Someone she was protecting by leaving the way she did. I just never imagined it might have been me. Why would she have been protecting you? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. There was a long pause. Emma, your mother and I made some mistakes during that time. We were both drinking too much, both struggling with our own problems, and there were a few nights when our relationship became more than it should have been between siblings. My heart stopped. He knew. Maybe not the full extent of what it meant, but he knew something inappropriate had happened between them. We never talked about it afterward, he said quietly. Just pretended it never happened and tried to move on. But when she disappeared a few months later, I always wondered if I'd somehow driven her away. I found myself in the impossible position of having to decide whether to tell this man, my father, my uncle, both and neither, that his worst fears about that time were completely justified. That those few nights of inappropriate behavior had created me. Robert, I said finally, I think there are some things we need to talk about in person. We met 2 days later at a diner, about an hour from my apartment. I recognized him immediately from the photos Michael and Jennifer had shown me. He was tall, like me, had the same dark hair, the same blue eyes. The family resemblance was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. He looked nervous, older than his 54 years, but hopeful in a way that made what I was about to tell him even more heartbreaking. You look like her, he said, as I slid into the booth across from him. Patricia, when she was younger. But you have the Morrison eyes, Robert. Before we go any further, there's something I need you to understand about my conception. I told him everything. The DNA results, the genetic analysis, the certainty that my parents were siblings. I watched his face go through the same cycle of emotions I'd seen in Michael and Jennifer. Confusion, disbelief, and then a kind of horrified acceptance. When I finished talking, he put his head in his hands and didn't speak for a long time. I ruined her life, he said finally. I ruined both of your lives. You didn't know? I should have known better. She was my little sister, and I was supposed to protect her, not. God, Emma, I am so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry for what I did to her. What I did to you. It was strange watching this man I barely knew break down over mistakes that had led to my existence. I felt sorry for him, angry at him, connected to him, and repulsed by him all at the same time. What happened between you two? He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup like it might provide answers. I was 23, she was 19. My marriage was falling apart. I was drinking heavily, and Patricia was the only person who seemed to understand what I was going through. She'd come over after my ex-wife would drop off Michael and Jennifer, help me with the kids, listen to me complain about the divorce. He paused, seeming to struggle with the memories. One night, after the kids were asleep, we were both drunk and feeling sorry for ourselves. She started crying about how everyone in the family thought she was a failure, and I was trying to comfort her, and somehow that comfort became physical. It happened maybe 3 or 4 times over a few weeks, and then we both sobered up and realized how fucked up it was. Did you ever talk about it? Once, Patricia came to me about a week after the last time and said we had to pretend it never happened, that we could never let anyone know what we'd done. I agreed because I was horrified by my own behavior, and I thought that would be the end of it. But then she disappeared. 2 months later. Left a note saying she needed a fresh start, that the family would be better off without her. I thought she was just running away from the shame of what we'd done, not that she was pregnant with my child. We sat in silence for a while, both processing the weight of decisions made 33 years ago that had shaped the entire trajectory of 3 lives. Do you want a relationship with me? I asked finally, knowing what you know now. He looked up at me with eyes that were exactly the same shade of blue as mine. Emma, you're my daughter. You're also my niece, which makes this the most complicated family situation imaginable, but you're still my daughter. I missed 32 years of your life because of my mistakes and your mother's choices. If you're willing to try to build some kind of relationship, even if it's unconventional, I'd like that very much. What about your wife, Michael and Jennifer? How do we explain this to everyone? Honestly, I don't know. It's going to be devastating for a lot of people. My wife doesn't know about what happened with Patricia, and finding out is probably going to destroy our marriage. Michael and Jennifer are going to have to process that their father is also their brother-in-law, that their cousin is their half-sister. There's no roadmap for how to handle this. Over the following months, we worked out a delicate balance. Robert told his wife the truth about what had happened with Patricia. And as predicted, it ended their 25-year marriage. She couldn't get past the betrayal and the fact that he'd kept such a massive secret for so long. Michael and Jennifer struggled with seeing their father differently, but ultimately decided that family was more important than the complicated circumstances of how that family was formed. As for my mother, Patricia, our relationship remained fractured. She continued to try to rebuild what we'd had, but I couldn't get past the lies. Not just the lies about my father, but all the lies that had shaped my entire worldview. Every story she'd told me about our life, every explanation for why we were alone, every reason why we couldn't connect with family had been carefully crafted to hide the truth about my origins. "I was protecting you," she said during one of our last conversations. "I was protecting everyone." "You were protecting yourself," I replied. "And in doing that, you robbed me of the chance to know my family, to understand my own history, to make informed decisions about my health and my future. We haven't spoken in 6 months now. I don't know if we ever will again." I started therapy, finally working with a counselor who specializes in family trauma and genetic sexual abuse. It's helped me understand that I'm not responsible for the circumstances of my conception, that my worth as a person isn't diminished by how I came to exist. I've learned coping strategies for dealing with the shame and confusion that come with being the product of incest. And I've started to build a sense of identity that's based on who I am rather than where I came from. Marcus and I decided to postpone having children until I've worked through more of the psychological aftermath of these discoveries. We consulted with genetic counselors about the risks associated with my parentage. And while there are some increased risks for certain conditions, they're not as severe as I'd feared. If and when we do have kids, we'll monitor for specific genetic markers and make informed decisions, based on actual medical science rather than fear and shame. The strangest thing is how normal parts of my life feel now, despite everything. I have a relationship with Robert that's awkward but genuine. He's not exactly a father figure that ship-sailed 32 years ago, but he's family in a way that feels meaningful. Michael and Jennifer have become real friends, not just genetic relatives. We get together for holidays now, creating new traditions that acknowledge the complicated nature of our family without being defined by it. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if Patricia had made different choices 33 years ago. If she'd told the truth about the pregnancy, if she'd stayed and faced the consequences, if she'd let me grow up knowing my real family. But those are hypothetical questions that don't have answers. And I've learned that spending too much time on what-if scenarios is a recipe for madness. What I know now is this: I am the daughter of Patricia Morrison and Robert Morrison, siblings who made a devastating mistake that resulted in my existence. I am the product of incest, raised on lies, denied my heritage for 3 decades. I am also a marketing manager who's good at her job, a wife who's loved deeply, a friend who shows up for people, a person who tries to be kind and honest in a world that's often neither. The circumstances of my conception don't define me, but they're part of my story now. And for the first time in my life, I'm living in the truth instead of in someone else's version of it. Now, I look at my reflection and I see both my parents, the woman who raised me and the man who created me with her, in a moment of mutual brokenness. I see the Morrison eyes and the Morrison stubbornness and the Morrison tendency to love fiercely and make terrible decisions. I see 32 years of lies that shaped me and 2 years of truth that are reshaping me. Most importantly, I see someone who survived the destruction of everything she thought she knew about herself and chose to build something new from the ruins. Not perfect, not simple, but real.